Well, I'm just interviewing my friend Dave Armstrong. We've been on OM at different times, but in many places, different places, but the same places, but at different times.
Different times.
And I'd like to interview you, Dave, and tell me some of your story.
Okay. Right. Well, my background, of course, I wasn't a Christian until I was 16. And I became a Christian in school because I got very friendly with a young lady. And she was the one who introduced me to Christ. First of all, she was good looking, lovely personality. So I thought I'll get a date with this young lady. So I did. And I invited her to the movies. And so, right, we went to the pictures together. And then after that, she said, Dave, I came with you to the cinema. Now I'd like to invite you to come with me to a Christian meeting. Christian meeting? Now that's different, but she was a nice girl, so I thought I'll go along with this. And she said, it's not in a church, it's actually going to be in a dance hall. And I was more used to going to dance halls than going to church when I was 16, so went along. And that evening, I heard the gospel in a real way, perhaps for the first time. And I thought, wow, this is a great message. I mean, I don't care for God, and yet he tells me that he cares for me. So I thought, good message, but didn't mean too much to me. But at the end of the preacher's message, he said, now, we have a room to one side here, and for those who are interested, we'd like to invite you in, talk with you personally. I wasn't going to go for that, but the young lady gave me a dig in the ribs and said, did you raise your hand saying you wanted to go? And so, rather embarrassed, I got up out of my seat and I went into this little room and I had a chat with a gentleman there. Never met him before, but he opened the scriptures to me and showed me how I could simply trust Jesus as my savior. And I was thinking, if I become a Christian, probably have to start going to church. Wasn't so interested. Perhaps even Sunday school. And in my mind, I was thinking, no, I'm going to put this off. I'm going to leave it perhaps for another time. And then Mr. Brockbank, Arthur was his name, he said, should we pray? Well, I didn't have anything against praying, so he went ahead and he prayed. And then he said, now, Dave, you pray. Well, I'd never prayed out loud before, so this was something quite new, and I really didn't know what to say. But you know what? A Bible verse came to my mind. Now, I didn't read the Bible, so how this Bible verse should come to me, I still don't know. A revelation from God? Sounds like it to me. But it was, he is a friend who is closer than a brother. Now, I'm from a family of 4 brothers. I'm the youngest. And we were good pals, but not really the closest. We all had our own friends. But I prayed very simply, Lord Jesus, become that friend to me. And we finished praying. I said goodbye to Mr. Brockbank. On the way home with my girlfriend Pearl Stott, I lived in Bolton, Lancashire, near Manchester in England. I even felt different. I couldn't really fully understand it, but it was as if I was walking on air. Of course, later on when I started reading the Bible for myself, I realized what had happened. The load of sin had been forgiven and lifted off my shoulders. No wonder I felt quite different. And so I started to go into this church. It was a Brethren Assembly in Bolton, Hebron Hall. And I started going to the Sunday school. And you know what? As I started reading the Bible, this came alive to me. It was a book that I'd not given thought to before, but now it was alive and it had great meaning. And I wanted to fashion my life by what I was reading in the Bible. And I wanted to become a disciple of Christ. Then, that was in 1960. So I attended that church for about 3 years. And then a group called Operation Mobilization came to Bolton. And these were young people who'd given up some years of their life to serve the Lord, and they left maybe their studies, they left their home. Some of them were Americans, some Italian, Dutch, German, and a few hundred of them had gathered there around Bolton, Atherton in fact, and they were having a conference. And these young people who came to my church, just a handful of them, they were telling us about this, and I thought, wow, this sounds terrific. And I was very much challenged by what they were saying. And so I decided that I was going to leave my job. I worked for British Rail by that time, in the goods office in Bolton. I'd leave my job and I joined them. So I joined Operation Mobilization, January 1964. And I worked with OM in many different places. Before I joined, a friend of mine, Alan Jenkins, had gone to Bible College, Morelands Bible College, great place to study the scriptures. And I was saving up to join him the next year. But now OM had come along, I thought, I'll work with OM for 1 year and then I'll go to Bible College. So I did, but that year I enjoyed the time so much, and the young folk that I'd met who were dedicated to serving the Lord. And George Verwood said, Dave, instead of going to Bible College in England, why don't you consider Bible College in India? We need more workers there anyway. Well, I'd never considered India, that's for sure, but I thought, doesn't sound like a bad idea. Maybe I'll do that. So off I went to India. This was in 1965. And while I was there, I could tell you amazing stories. It seems as though we in the West, we're so comfortable in our Christianity and in our nice homes that we probably don't trust the Lord in the ways that you've got to when you're on the mission field, because sometimes you might not even know where your next meal is coming from when you're on the mission field. And then I got into Allahabad University. And the reason I did is because originally I wanted to go to Allahabad Bible College. And so that's why I'd gone to Allahabad. This is in northern India. But before I got there, that summer, we'd been preaching in the villages in India. And I got very friendly with a young man called Vishal Mangalwadi. Great young guy, dedicated to the Lord. He's now known as a Christian philosopher around the world. And Vishal said, Dave, I'm just about to start university. The Bible College, if you go there, you might have 20 students. They're all Christians. Why don't you join me in the university? There's just a handful of Christians with maybe 8,000 students, mainly Hindus and Muslims. Well, didn't take long to think, maybe that's the place to go. So I managed to get into university, studied for 3 years. I came away with a bachelor's degree in philosophy, history, and English literature. And it did me a world of good. And the people I got to know, some of my closest friends, of course, in the class, I was the only white Englishman as a student there in Allahabad University back in the 60s. And so my closest friends were Hindus and Muslims. I was the only white guy, the only Christian in my class, but they were such great guys. We got on so well, and I learned a lot from them. And I learned a lot just being in the university. It was completely new for me, and it was a fantastic time. Then, of course, I then spent 5 years in India. Time to come back home. So we drove back. We'd driven to India in 1965 now, in 1970, driving back through northern India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, eventually over to Turkey and back into Europe. And since I'd lived in Italy with OM in 1964, I thought I'd go back on an OM summer campaign to Italy. And that summer, that's where I found Matilda, my wife-to-be. Matilda's from Switzerland, and so we got to know each other on the OM team in Sesto San Giovanni. This is in just outside Milano in northern Italy. And 2 years later, we got married. And then we decided we'd join the OM ship ministry. the first OM ship was MV Logos. And so we lived on board. We drove again. The ship had already been visiting many countries in the East, and it was now in Kuwait. So again, we set off from Belgium, from the OM headquarters in Zaventem, with 2 or 3 vehicles heading to Kuwait. And we drove all the way there and boarded the ship. Spent a year from Kuwait. We sailed to Bombay in those days, now Mumbai. Sailed around the coast of India, then over to Malaysia, and then to Kota Kinabalu, and on to the Philippines, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan. And this took about a year. Eventually, we got off the ship in Sri Lanka, and we'd been invited by an old friend of mine, Mike Wakely, to come up to Kathmandu. I was in the book ministry selling books with STL for some time, so he asked me to run the bookshop in Kathmandu, and we did that for about a year. Then eventually we came back to Europe and back to STL, and my old friend Jerry Davey, who was the director at that time of STL, he said, "Dave, we'd like you to join with us afresh. We want you to be a manager of our bookshop in Bromley." And so we settled in Bromley instead of going back up to the north of England. And we had then 5 bookshops. So I became the manager of the 5 bookshops, although each one had its own manager who did a great job, but I sort of looked after them as best as I could. But also, we used to put on very big book exhibitions at the Filey Convention, which eventually was taken over by Spring Harvest. This was in the Butlins holiday camps, first at Filey and then in Skegness. And then Jerry asked me if I would go on the trips to Africa to visit bookshops there as a sales rep. So I became the international sales manager for our literature. And every year I'd spend time in Africa, and I'd begin on the West Coast, in the Gambia, then visit most of the English-speaking countries in Africa. After the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, Ghana, then over to Cameroon, then to Kenya, Jambo, for those of you who might be from Kenya, and then going south into Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, and visiting all the bookshops, and then up to Egypt, Cyprus, Israel, Malta, then back home. Usually this annual trip from 1978 until about 1986, I'd go every year almost to all these countries.
You got quite a lot of books in Uganda, didn't you?
I did. I want to tell you now about this time in Uganda, because that was something special. I didn't go to Uganda because Idi Amin was not the most friendly of people, and he was giving people a rough time. We know he slaughtered many people, and eventually he was overthrown and he left the country, and Obote became the prime minister or the president. And Jerry Davey said, "Dave, I've made arrangements with Tia Fund so we can help the bookshops in Uganda." And the arrangement was fantastic. Tia Fund in this country was going to pay the bills for as many books and as many Christian books as the bookshops in Uganda wanted to buy. Now, the Uganda bookshops, they had to pay, but they could pay, they didn't have foreign currency to import stuff, but they could pay in Uganda shillings. And that for them was a great boon. So I wrote to 3 bookshops, the Uganda bookshop, the Logos bookstore, and St. Paul's, a Catholic bookshop. So on my next visit to Kenya, I then took a plane to, I'm not sure it was Entebbe any longer. I think Entebbe airport had been shot up by the Israelis not long before that. So it might have been the domestic airport that I arrived in. And I jumped on the bus to get to Kampala, the capital city. Well, we got halfway there and we heard gunshots. So the bus driver pulled up quickly, and out of the bush came all these soldiers.
Wow.
With their guns. They came on board the bus and ordered us all off at gunpoint. And then they stood us in a line. One soldier, he had a little tripod, with a machine gun on it. And this machine gun, he was pointing to all of us as we stood in a row with our knees knocking, thinking, we're in a firing squad, and any minute now, it's going to be our last minute. They came to us, they frisked us, they went on the bus and checked. I'm not sure what they were checking for, maybe in case some were carrying guns. I don't know what they were searching for. We held our breath, it seemed, for about half an hour. And finally, they said, get back on the bus. And to this day, I don't know whose soldiers they were, whether they were Obote's new regime or Big Daddy's old regime. But they let us get back on the bus and on the way to Kampala. Once in Kampala, of course, my first stop, I headed for the Uganda bookshop. They're easy to find. People are very helpful in Africa, and they'll always tell you where these places are. So I walked in on the manager's office and I said, my name's Mr. Armstrong. Did you get the letter that I sent you? He said, Mr. Armstrong, I got your letter, but I didn't believe it. It was too good to be true. But now you're here. This is fantastic. He said, I'm going to take you to my buyer. So we went down into the basement and I was there for hours. He said to the buyer, I want you to order 1 million Christian books from this Englishman. And so we stayed for hours. They were ordering thousands of each title. In actual fact, he didn't order 1 million because I counted it when I was flying out 3 days later. But it wasn't far off. It was probably 800,000 and 900,000. But of course, with the other bookshops, it was well over 1 million because St. Paul's bookshop, they ordered again thousands of books. And the Logos bookstore, he too ordered thousands of Christian books. And Christian books flooded into Uganda in that year. I think it was probably 84, 83, something like that. Probably like never before. And it was great to think that now what these shops had empty bookshelves, now they were flooding it with a container full of Christian books, which was just fantastic. So I wanted to tell you that little story of life on the mission field and what a joy it is in serving Christ. And I want to be a disciple of Jesus, not only a disciple, but a fanatic follower of Jesus. Amen. Because he's made the difference in my life. And I know he has in your life too. So back to you, Alan.
Yes, thank you for that, Dave. I first met you when I came back from India in Bromley. I stayed in Treaty Road.
Okay.
Is it Treaty Road or
Tweedy Road?
Tweedy Road,
that's right.
Tweedy, Tweddy, yeah.
Right.
And you said to me, if you carry on preaching, people will support you. And I did. I ended up starting a church, but it failed through domestic reasons. We won't go into those.
Okay.
And then I became a leader in Ealing Church. And now I'm in a church now where we're doing missions. And we're going back to some of the places I've been to and new places as well. Like Orissa, where there's been a lot of persecution.
Right. Yeah.
We've been there. We've led Dalits to Christ.
Yeah.
So we've had wonderful experiences and been in Kenya and villages and in Rwanda. I was on the borders of Burundi last October. I saw 70 people healed in one meeting. I preached on the radio station and people came to Christ on the radio station and people got healed as well through the radio. And also we went on the streets and did personal evangelism. So like you, I've got this OM in my being.
Yeah. Now, speaking of persecution, actually, when we drove to India in '65, Frank Dietz was our team leader.
I remember Frank.
And once we got into India, we then drove this great big truck down to southern India, to Kerala. And on the way there, we went through Mysore. And everywhere we'd go, we'd stop. If we'd find Christians in the churches there, we'd probably stay with them overnight and then move on. Well, we went to one place and we would sell gospels and gospel calendars. And we'd preach from the back of the truck. We'd hang on the back of the truck and preach and sell them, and then we'd move on. Well, we stayed with these Christians for a few days, and in this town we were preaching from the back of the truck, and we had Indian brothers on our team. And suddenly on the third day we had fantastic contact with people. Crowds would gather around us, but on the third day a political group known as the Arya Samaj, they mixed in with the group and they snatched the books from our Indian friends
Yeah.
beat the Indian fellas. I don't think they would touch the white ones. We sort of were special, don't know why. But they started to burn the Gospels, and they threw them inside our truck with the intention, of course, of burning the whole truck and the team too.
Yeah.
And the police came, and they arrested us. And in actual fact, by arresting us, they saved our lives.
Yes.
Because they took us off to the police station, and of course we were no longer in the crowd, so we were safe. And they actually apologized. They said, you know, this in India, this is a democracy. You Christians, like everybody else, you have the liberty to preach your message. But for your own sake, we're going to ask you if tomorrow you will leave. And I remember that following morning when we gathered with the local Christians. We gathered in a big circle, and the police were part of this circle, and we decided we would pray and thank God for his deliverance, for the goodness of looking after us, and
Yes.
for the Christians who were there, and for the police, because they'd saved our lives.
Yes.
When we finished praying, one of the policemen, he was weeping because
Wow.
he saw we were there preaching the love of God, because that's what
Yes.
Christianity is. It's not
Yes.
there to condemn you. If
No.
anyone goes to hell, it's not because God wants you there.
That's right.
Hell was made for the devil and his angels.
It's true.
It's not made for mankind. So anyone who goes there, it's because you've decided to go.
Yes.
So that was another little escapade
Yes.
along the way, Alan.
It's funny, we get these escapades. I was preaching in villages in UP, and we had a truck of 12 guys, and I was the only English guy, and everyone wanted to speak on the megaphone. So we get a big crowd, then we'd sell them the books rather than giving them, because if they were given, they'd use them to light a fire. But we knew if they paid for them, they would read them. And we were selling New Testaments in Hindi and other gospel packets and things like that. So we got crowds buying the books, but we got to one location. No one wanted a microphone. Everyone wanted a microphone. And I thought, this is it. This is the same as the wells that was stopped. Isaac was unstopping the wells, and they were argued over the wells. The 12th well, he was allowed to use that well. I thought, God has made room for me like he did with Isaac. And so I said, give me the microphone. And the reason they didn't want to preach was because there was a militant Hindu in the crowd. They could tell by what he was wearing that he was a militant. And they beat up Christians and Muslims and other non-Hindus. So I got up and I started preaching against idolatry. You shall not make any God beside me. You shall not make a stone to bow down to it. I'm the Lord your God. You shall worship only me. He started to heckle me. And David Chater, who looked Indian, he was Anglo-Indian actually, spoke very good Hindi. He saw what the guy was like. He went and stood next to him, told him to be quiet. So he thought other members in the public might be with me, so he was quiet. I got away with preaching the gospel. So God protected us, you know. Many times I could tell instances like that in places like India, but not just India, Africa as well.
I mean, India has been such a fantastic place,
Yes.
and full of rich memories. And our Indian friends who we got to know and love, and even to this day, we keep in touch with them.
Yes.
So if any Indians should be listening, we want to say, Yeshu Masih ki Jai! And God bless you. And thanks for listening.
Yeah.
So I'm going to call it a day there.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Stuti Gaham, Jambo, Asante Sana, Shukriya.